Marcus woke up that morning with a feeling of both nervousness and hope. He had been looking for a good job for many months, and today felt like his chance to finally change his life. He lived in a very small apartment, with thin walls and old furniture, but he kept it clean and neat. As the sunlight entered through the window, he sat on the edge of his bed and whispered to himself that today might be the day his struggles would finally ease. The interview was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and he knew he had to leave home early to catch the bus. He owned only one decent shirt and a pair of pants that still looked somewhat professional. The shirt was a little tight, and the pants had been worn many times, but he ironed them carefully the night before and placed them on the chair beside his bed. He polished his shoes until they shined, even though they were old and the leather had cracks. To Marcus, it was not about how expensive they were, it was about showing respect for the opportunity. He ate a simple breakfast of bread and tea, trying to calm his stomach, which was full of butterflies. As he got ready, he kept practicing his answers in front of the mirror. "Why should we hire you?" he asked himself in a deep voice, pretending to be the interviewer. Then he smiled and replied softly, "Because I work hard, I don't give up, and I always give my best." He chuckled at himself, but he also meant every word. After locking his door, Marcus walked quickly to the bus stop. The morning was bright, and the street was busy with people going to work, children heading to school, and shopkeepers opening their stores. He looked at the time on his small phone. If the bus came on time, he would reach the company 30 minutes early, just as he had planned. While waiting at the crossing near the main road, Marcus heard a strange sound. It was the loud hissing of air escaping from a tire. He turned his head and saw a car parked by the roadside. The hood was slightly open, and smoke seemed to rise. A woman stood near it, waving at passing cars for help, but nobody stopped. People kept walking, and cars drove by without slowing down. Marcus hesitated for a moment. He looked at his watch and then back at the woman. If he helped her, he might miss the bus and be late for the interview. His heart told him that ignoring someone in trouble was not the right thing to do. He remembered how his mother used to tell him, "Son, no matter how busy you are, if you can help someone, you should. Kindness always returns to you in ways you may not see immediately." Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked toward the car. The woman looked relieved when she saw him approach. She explained that her tire had burst suddenly and she had no idea how to fix it. Marcus nodded and said not to worry. He put his small bag aside, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. He found the spare tire in the trunk and the tools needed. The bolts were stiff, and his hands became dirty with grease. The sun was already getting hot, and sweat formed on his forehead. Still, Marcus worked patiently, turning the tools with strength until the old tire came off. His shirt got stained, and he worried about how he would look at the interview now, but he pushed the thought away and focused on finishing the job. The woman watched him carefully, surprised at his calmness and skill. She offered to call for roadside service, but Marcus shook his head and said it would take too long. Within minutes, he had the spare tire fixed in place. He lowered the car and tested it, making sure everything was safe. Finally, he stood up, wiping his hands with an old handkerchief. The woman thanked him sincerely and reached into her purse to give him some money. Marcus immediately raised his hand and gently refused. "I didn't do it for money," he said softly. "I just wanted to help." She looked at him with curiosity, almost as if she wanted to know more about him. But Marcus picked up his bag quickly and excused himself, explaining that he had to rush to an important appointment. He ran toward the bus stop, but when he got there, his heart sank. The bus had already gone. He waited for the next one, but by the time it came, too much time had passed. His chance of being early was gone. He sat on the bus, feeling both anxious and disappointed. He told himself he did the right thing, but at the same time, he worried that the interviewers would think he was irresponsible for being late. The city passed by outside the bus window, tall buildings, busy streets, and people in a hurry. Marcus felt small in that moment, just a young man with big dreams but too many obstacles. He arrived at the company building finally, breathing heavily from running up the steps. The receptionist looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, sir, the interview round is already over." Those words hit him like a heavy stone. He tried to explain that he was delayed by something important, but the receptionist only shook her head politely and said the managers had already left. Marcus stood there silently, his bag hanging loosely from his shoulder, his shirt dirty from grease, and his shoes dusty from the road. He felt like all his preparation, his careful ironing, his polishing of shoes, had been wasted in just one morning. Still, deep inside, he told himself again that he had made the right choice. Helping that woman was more important than looking perfect. As he turned around to leave, he whispered, "Maybe this wasn't my chance, but maybe another will come." That was the moment his life was about to take a turn he never expected. Marcus walked slowly down the steps of the tall building, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. The words of the receptionist still rang in his ears. "I'm sorry, the interviews are already over." He felt as if the door to his future had just been shut in his face. For months, he had been preparing for this day, dreaming about how this one opportunity could change everything. And now, because he had chosen to stop and help a stranger, that chance was gone. He stopped at the corner of the street, leaned against a wall, and closed his eyes for a moment. His heart was still racing, and his palms felt sweaty. He wanted to believe he had done the right thing, but it was hard not to think about the job he had lost. The job could have meant steady income, food on the table, and maybe even sending a little money back to his mother, who always prayed for his success. Still, when Marcus pictured the woman's face, the relief in her eyes when the car tire was fixed, he felt a small warmth inside. He reminded himself that helping others mattered, even if it came at a cost. His mother's words echoed again, "Kindness is never wasted." He tried to hold on to that thought as he adjusted his bag and started walking toward the bus stop. Just as he was about to leave the building's main entrance behind, Marcus heard a familiar voice. It was the woman he had helped earlier that morning. She was stepping out of a sleek car now, her posture confident, and her clothes crisp and professional. She looked very different from the woman in distress by the roadside. She seemed composed, almost powerful, like someone who belonged in a world Marcus could only dream about. Their eyes met for a moment. She paused, recognizing him instantly. It's you," she said with surprise in her voice. Marcus gave a small, polite smile, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to appear awkward, but his heart was beating faster. He nodded and simply replied, "Yes, ma'am. I'm glad you made it safely." The woman tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. She noticed the grease stains on his shirt and the tired look in his eyes. Something about his calmness and humility caught her attention. "Were you here for the interviews?" she asked, almost as if she already guessed the answer. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to sound like he was making excuses. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I was supposed to be here earlier, but I didn't make it in time." The woman's expression softened. She knew very well why he had been late. She remembered how he had refused her money, how he had worked with patience and care even though he was clearly in a hurry. She also remembered the words he said, "I didn't do it for money. I just wanted to help." Those words replayed in her mind now, and she couldn't ignore the weight they carried. Marcus, however, did not realize what was going through her thoughts. To him, she was simply a kind stranger he had helped. He had no idea that she was not just connected to the company but was actually the one leading it. She was the CEO, the very person who had the power to decide who would be hired and who wouldn't. The woman smiled faintly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he replied, trying not to sound nervous. "Well, Marcus, she said thoughtfully, sometimes being late doesn't mean the end of everything. Sometimes it just means life has another plan for you. Her words puzzled him. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he nodded politely. He didn't want to linger or make her feel uncomfortable. He gave a small bow of his head and said, "I should go now. Thank you again." He turned to leave, feeling that his day was ending in failure. But as he walked away, the woman kept watching him. There was something rare about this young man, something she rarely saw in interviews filled with polished resumes and rehearsed answers. She saw integrity. She saw a willingness to sacrifice personal gain for the sake of helping another human being. Meanwhile, Marcus made his way to the bus stop again. As he sat on the bench, waiting, he replayed the whole morning in his mind. He thought about how carefully he had ironed his shirt, how he had practiced his answers, and how all of it seemed wasted now. But then, another thought came to him: maybe the job was never meant for him in the first place. Maybe life was preparing him for something else. When the bus finally arrived, he climbed in and sat near the window. The city rushed by outside, but Marcus hardly noticed. He was deep in thought, caught between sadness and quiet acceptance. He tried to convince himself that everything happens for a reason, even though he couldn't see the reason yet. At the same time, back in the building, the woman walked into the office with a confident stride. Her staff greeted her respectfully, addressing her as Madam. She nodded, but her mind was still on Marcus. She thought about how he had looked tired but determined, poor but dignified, disappointed but still kind. She made a decision in her heart that this story was not over. Marcus had no idea that the woman he helped was already planning to see him again. To him, the day felt like a closed chapter, but in truth, it was only the beginning of something much larger. The kindness he showed on the roadside was about to circle back to him in ways he could not yet imagine. As he reached home, Marcus pushed open the door of his small apartment and sat on his bed, exhausted. The silence of the room wrapped around him. He removed his shoes, looked at his stained shirt, and let out a long sigh. He felt like crying, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Tomorrow is another day." He didn't know that tomorrow would come with a surprise that would change everything. The woman he helped was no ordinary person. She was the very boss he had been hoping to impress. And soon, Marcus would learn that missing his interview was not the end of his dream, it was the doorway to something far greater. Marcus woke up the next morning still feeling the weight of yesterday's disappointment. The thought of missing his interview because he chose to help someone lingered in his mind. He kept asking himself if he had done the right thing. His shirt from yesterday lay folded on the chair, still carrying the grease marks from the tire he had changed. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the woman's face, the stranger he had helped, and how strangely calm she had been when she saw him at the company's entrance. He tried to brush it off. Life goes on, he whispered to himself as he made a simple breakfast. He decided to go out and hand in more job applications. He couldn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He had to keep trying. So, with his bag in hand, he left the apartment once again. When Marcus stepped onto the busy street, he noticed how the city seemed to carry on without him. Cars honked, people hurried to work, and vendors shouted their morning deals. It reminded him that the world didn't stop for anyone's sadness. That gave him a small push to keep moving forward. But fate was working quietly behind the scenes. Inside the tall glass building of the company, the woman he had helped, her name was Miss Reynolds, was already in a meeting with her managers. She sat at the head of the table, her presence strong yet graceful. The managers discussed the previous day's interviews, going over resumes and making recommendations. They spoke about who seemed qualified, who had good experience, and who could fit into the team. But Miss Reynolds wasn't fully listening. Her mind kept drifting back to Marcus. She remembered the honesty in his voice, his refusal to accept money, and his clear sincerity. She thought about how he looked standing there in a stained shirt but still carrying himself with dignity. She had interviewed hundreds of people over the years, and while many came with polished resumes and smooth words, few had shown such true character outside the interview room. She finally interrupted the conversation. "Did we receive an application from a young man named Marcus?" she asked. The room went quiet. The managers exchanged glances and quickly searched through their papers. One of them found his resume in the stack. "Yes, Miss Reynolds," the manager said. "But he didn't make it on time for his interview. We marked him absent." Miss Reynolds looked at the paper, her eyes narrowing with thought. "I want to see him," she said firmly. "Arrange for him to come in again." The managers were surprised. It was unusual for the CEO herself to step in for a candidate who had missed an interview. But they knew better than to question her judgment. She was known for her sharp instincts and her ability to see potential in people others might overlook. Meanwhile, Marcus was walking back from handing out another set of resumes when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hesitantly, he answered. "Hello, is this Marcus?" a professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Marcus," he replied cautiously. "This is from the HR department of Reynolds Enterprises. We would like to invite you for a second chance interview tomorrow morning." Marcus stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. I thought the interviews were already closed," he asked, still unsure if he was hearing correctly. "There has been a request to see you again," the voice explained. "Please come tomorrow at 10. Marcus hung up the phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. He had been given another chance, something he thought was impossible. He couldn't explain why, but a small smile formed on his face. "Maybe kindness really does come back," he whispered. The next day, Marcus dressed carefully once again. He had washed his shirt overnight, and though the stains didn't completely go away, it looked better. He polished his shoes once more, combed his hair neatly, and practiced a few answers in the mirror. He told himself he would not waste this opportunity. When he arrived at the company, his heart beat fast as he walked through the same glass doors that had felt so heavy the last time. The receptionist this time greeted him with a polite smile. "Please wait, Marcus. Someone will come for you shortly." After a few minutes, one of the HR staff guided him into a large office. Marcus entered nervously, and then his eyes widened in shock. Sitting at the desk was the same woman he had helped by the roadside. Miss Reynolds looked at him with a gentle smile, her hands folded in front of her. "It's you," Marcus said softly, unable to hide his surprise. "Yes," she replied, her tone warm. "It's me. Yesterday you helped me when you could have walked away. You missed your interview because of that. I think I owe you this chance." Marcus stood there, his mouth slightly open. He realized now that she wasn't just someone connected to the company, she was the boss herself. His heart pounded louder, but he took a deep breath and sat down when she motioned to the chair in front of her. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus," Miss Reynolds said kindly. He swallowed nervously and began to speak. He talked about how he grew up with little but was taught to value honesty and hard work. He shared how he never gave up searching for opportunities, even when rejection became normal. He admitted that life had been hard, but he refused to let it change his belief in doing the right thing. As he spoke, Miss Reynolds listened carefully. She didn't interrupt, and she didn't glance at his resume. She simply observed the young man in front of her, hearing his sincerity in every word. When he finished, there was a moment of silence in the room. Marcus worried that he had said too much, or maybe not enough. But then Miss Reynolds smiled again. "You may not have the perfect resume," she said slowly, "but I see something rare in you. Character, integrity, determination. Those are qualities we can't teach in training. They come from within." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. "We'll arrange a formal interview with my team," Miss Reynolds continued. "But I wanted to hear from you myself first." Marcus nodded quickly. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving me this chance." As he left her office, his steps felt lighter than they had in months. He had walked into the building before as a man full of disappointment, but today he walked out with hope. He didn't know the outcome yet, but he finally believed that his kindness had not been wasted. What Marcus didn't know was that Miss Reynolds had already made her decision in her heart. The managers would conduct their formal interview, but she had already seen enough. She had seen the real man beyond the resume, the man who would one day become a valuable part of her company. And so, the twist of fate was revealed. The woman Marcus had stopped to help, the one whose car tire he had changed with his bare hands, was not only a stranger. She was the very boss he had been hoping to impress. Marcus could hardly sleep that night. The image of Miss Reynolds sitting across from him kept replaying in his mind. He had never expected that the woman he helped on the roadside was not just someone important in the company but the very head of it. It felt like a story out of a movie, yet it was real, and it was happening to him. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought about her words: character, integrity, determination. Those words gave him hope, but they also put pressure on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would be sitting in front of a whole panel, and this time he couldn't afford to let fear hold him back. When morning came, Marcus woke early. He wore the same shirt again, carefully washed and ironed. He had done his best to remove the stains, and though a faint mark was still visible, he didn't let it discourage him. He reminded himself that the interviewers were not going to hire his shirt, they were going to hire him for who he was. He polished his shoes one more time and looked in the mirror. His reflection showed a young man who had been through many struggles but still stood with dignity. "You've come this far," he whispered to himself. "Now finish the journey." He arrived at the company building half an hour early. Sitting in the waiting area, he noticed the other candidates who looked sharper and more confident. Some wore brand new suits, and their resumes were printed on heavy paper. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach, but then he remembered Miss Reynolds' calm smile. If she believed in him enough to give him another chance, then he owed it to her and to himself to give his best. Finally, his name was called. He walked into a large conference room where several managers sat around a long table. Papers and files were in front of them, and their serious expressions made the room feel colder than it was. Marcus greeted them politely and sat down. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of pages turning. One manager leaned forward. "Marcus, you missed your first interview. Can you explain why?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew this was his moment of truth. "On my way here, I saw someone whose car had broken down. She was alone, and many people passed by without helping. I stopped and changed her tire. By the time I finished, I missed my bus, and I was late. I understand that being late does not leave a good impression, but I believe helping someone in need was the right thing to do. I stand by that choice." The room was quiet again. Some managers raised their eyebrows, while others exchanged small glances. One of them asked, "So you chose to help a stranger even if it meant losing your chance here?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "Because jobs come and go, but character stays with you forever." That answer seemed to strike a chord. The managers asked him about his skills, his background, and his past work experiences. Marcus answered honestly, never pretending to be more than he was. He spoke about his willingness to learn, his commitment to working hard, and his determination to succeed despite challenges. Every word came from his heart. Halfway through the interview, the door opened quietly. Miss Reynolds stepped inside, carrying a folder. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Everyone straightened up, giving her their full attention. She nodded to the panel and took a seat at the end of the table, listening silently as the interview continued. Marcus felt a rush of nervousness, but he quickly steadied himself. He remembered how calm she had been when speaking to him before. That gave him courage. He focused on the questions and kept his answers steady, making sure to be both respectful and sincere. When the final question was asked, Marcus spoke with quiet confidence. "I don't come from much, but I have never let that stop me. I believe in working with honesty, respecting others, and giving my best every day. I may not have the fanciest degree, but I have the drive to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it gets." The managers took notes, and then Miss Reynolds finally spoke for the first time. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "That will be all for now." Marcus stood, gave a polite nod, and left the room. As the door closed behind him, he let out a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He didn't know if he had done enough, but he felt proud. For once, he hadn't tried to impress anyone with things he didn't have. He had simply shown them who he truly was. Inside the room, the managers began to discuss. Some pointed out his lack of experience compared to other candidates, but others mentioned his confidence and honesty. Miss Reynolds listened quietly, her eyes on the folder in front of her. After a while, she closed it and said, "We can train skills, but we cannot train character. Marcus has what many others don't. He understands responsibility, sacrifice, and values. That is the kind of person I want in this company." Her words carried weight, and the managers nodded in agreement. Decisions were not finalized immediately, but the direction was clear. Meanwhile, Marcus walked out of the building and into the sunlight. The air felt fresh, and his heart was light. He still didn't know what the outcome would be, but he felt at peace knowing he had spoken his truth. He sat on a bench near the bus stop and thought about how far he had come. Later that evening, Marcus returned home to his small apartment. He reheated leftover food and ate quietly, thinking about the day. He imagined what it would be like if he got the job, waking up every morning with purpose, being able to support himself, maybe even sending money to his mother to ease her burden. For the first time in a long while, those dreams didn't feel impossible. That night, as he lay in bed, he whispered a small prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for giving me the chance to show who I am. Whatever happens, I will keep moving forward." Little did Marcus know, the decision had already been made in his favor. Miss Reynolds had seen enough to know he belonged in her company. His journey was about to change course in a way he never could have imagined. A few days later, Marcus sat in his small apartment staring at his phone. Every minute felt like an hour. Ever since the interview panel and the unexpected presence of Miss Reynolds, he had been waiting for a call or an email. Sometimes he felt hopeful, remembering how she spoke about character and honesty. Other times, doubt crept in. He told himself, maybe they only gave me a chance out of kindness. Maybe I don't really stand a chance against all the other candidates. He tried to distract himself by cleaning his little apartment, polishing his shoes again, and even stepping outside for a walk. But no matter what he did, his thoughts returned to the same question: what if they don't call me back? On the fourth day, his phone finally rang. Marcus's hands trembled as he picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Hello, is this Marcus? This is the HR department from Reynolds Enterprises. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the position." Marcus froze, the words taking a moment to sink in. I got the job?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yes, congratulations. We'll send you the details about your start date. Please check your email today." When the call ended, Marcus sat down heavily on his bed, covering his face with his hands. A mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief washed over him. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. He whispered, "I did it. I finally did it. His eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. The following Monday, Marcus put on his carefully ironed shirt and polished shoes once more. This time, he wasn't going for an interview, he was reporting for his first day of work. As he walked toward the tall glass building, he noticed how different everything felt. The same doors that once felt heavy with rejection now felt like doors of opportunity. Inside, he was greeted warmly by staff who gave him his ID card and guided him to his desk. It wasn't a big office or a fancy position yet, but to Marcus, it meant the world. It was his chance to prove himself, to learn, and to grow. Mid-morning, he received a message that Miss Reynolds wanted to see him in her office. His heart raced again, just as it had the first time he stood before her. He knocked gently on her door, and her calm voice welcomed him in. She looked at him with a kind smile. "Marcus, welcome to the team," she said. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't have words to say how much this means to me." Miss Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "Do you know why you are here today? Not just because you helped me with my car, but because you showed who you truly are when no one was watching. That is rare. Skills can be taught, but values and integrity cannot. You reminded me that the best employees are not only those with strong resumes but those with strong character." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I just did what I thought was right," he said softly. "And that," Miss Reynolds replied, "is exactly why you are here. Remember, Marcus, success is not only about what you achieve for yourself but about the lives you touch along the way." Her words stayed with him long after he left her office. He walked back to his desk with a sense of pride he had never felt before. Over the weeks that followed, Marcus worked hard. He arrived early every day, eager to learn and willing to help his teammates. He wasn't afraid of doing small tasks or staying late when needed. His colleagues noticed his dedication, and slowly, they began to respect him. He wasn't just the new guy. He was someone who could be counted on. One afternoon, while helping a colleague with a difficult project, Marcus remembered how he had once been the one standing outside, feeling hopeless. Now, he was inside, part of something bigger than himself. It made him realize how quickly life could change when you stayed true to your values. Months later, at a company meeting, Miss Reynolds mentioned him without using his name. She told the story of a young man who missed his interview because he chose to help a stranger. She spoke about how that one act of kindness revealed more about his character than any resume ever could. Marcus listened quietly, realizing she was speaking about him, though no one else in the room knew it. His heart swelled with gratitude, and he promised himself he would never forget where he came from. Back at home, Marcus called his mother that evening. He told her about his job, his boss, and the lessons he was learning. She listened with tears in her eyes and pride in her heart. "I told you, son," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Kindness is never wasted. It always comes back in ways you least expect." Marcus smiled, looking out the window at the city lights. "You were right, Mom. It came back to me in the biggest way possible." As time went on, Marcus continued to grow in his role. He didn't become rich overnight, but he found something more valuable: purpose, dignity, and a belief that doing the right thing would always open the right doors. He thought back to the day he stood on the roadside, torn between helping a stranger and chasing his own dream. He realized now that helping her was chasing his dream. It was the very act that opened the door to his future. And so, the story of Marcus, the poor young man who missed his interview to help a woman, came full circle. The woman turned out to be the boss he had been hoping to impress. But more importantly, Marcus discovered that success is not only about being in the right place at the right time, it's about being the right person, even when no one is watching.